Welcome everyone. My name is Alana Bond and I'll be your presenter this afternoon. Thanks for joining us. As Bianca said, a big thanks to our sponsors for today, IOPSA. Their valued input enables us to bring these webinars to you. So first of all, just to put this camera on, which is taking a little while to connect, so that you can see that I am a real live person. It's not a pre-recorded interview. I'm actually going to put the camera off just from a bandwidth perspective to make it easier for everyone to hear the presentation. Please relax and enjoy the webinar. If you lose connection, do not panic. It should automatically reconnect. If this doesn't happen, you can just log back in the same way that you did at the beginning of the webinar. If I can ask you to please stay behind after the webinar to rate the webinar, this enables us to provide you with a better experience in the future. Also note this is a live recording, which will be available for those that may need a refresher afterwards or those who weren't able to join us in the beginning. Questions are most welcome. We generally allow questions at the end, but if you do need any clarification on anything that I'm saying, it's best rather to raise the question at the time and we'll try to address it at that time. The orange arrow hides and unhides your panel. Your mic is muted. If we unmute you for a question, you may need to do so on your side as well. Raising your hand straight forward, green for go and red for stop. Questions, just click on the plus. If there are any handouts, you can click to download from here as well. During the session I don't think we have any polls today, so we don't have to worry too much about the polls instructions. So on that basis, I'm going to kick off and get right into it. So the topic for today is focused on BEE for plumbers specifically, and in particular for plumbers who are servicing the public. So what this really means is typically plumbers that might say that they don't need to do BEE because it's not necessary for them. So just having a look at page 2, just to show where we're focused for today, that's construction companies and plumbers, as I've mentioned. And what I'd like to talk about here is what code applies. Now, as things stand right now, the generic codes apply to plumbers. There is a draft construction sector code that has been published for comment, and it's expected to be gazetted sometime in 2017. So because that's not yet actually in law, we've wanted to not focus on it for today's session because we'll just create confusion. But bear in mind that the rules may change slightly at some point during 2017 when this construction code is gazetted. Right, moving on to the first main section. So the first thing that we wanted to have a look at is plumbers and how they fit into the BEE legislation. So what page 3 shows you is that right back in 2007, that was the beginning point in terms of when the law and the legislation came into place. And back in 2007, there was also a draft construction code. But it took about 2 years for that draft construction code to be passed into law. So since 2009 until 2016, when the construction code was repealed, that code was what actually guided plumbers in terms of their obligations under BEE. Now, what happened in the interim there is that in 2015, the DTI codes changed, and because the construction sector didn't get their construction code into place in time, it was actually repealed, and we're in a situation now where the general DTI codes apply. The draft construction code was published then at the end of 2016, and rumor has it that it will be gazetted in the first half of 2017. But we are dealing with construction sector codes in a number of areas that have been passed for comment for over 2 years ago already, and they are still waiting to be published. So be aware that it's out there, but for now we're working off the DTI codes. Moving on to the next slide then, I won't go through this in too much detail, but really what it does is it just helps smaller plumbing organizations understand where and how they fit into the codes. So any entity that has a turnover of less than 10 million rand a year, or any entity that is a new entity that's a startup that hasn't traded for a whole year yet, is called an exempted micro-enterprise. And those enterprises are exempt from BEE. They are entitled to sign an affidavit to say that their turnover is less than 10 million rand, and they automatically achieve a level 4 BEE status, which is the generally accepted good status under BEE. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means in further slides. Qualifying small enterprises are businesses that have a turnover between 10 and 50 million rand. Now, those are generally pretty large plumbing organizations, and certainly not the focus of today. And then large entities are companies that have a turnover of more than 50 million rand. So that would not really be relevant to yourselves as small plumbers. However, it is relevant in the sense that many of the businesses that you might serve, if you're not serving the end customer, would have to measure themselves against that scorecard. Now, just to come back to exempted micro-enterprises and qualifying small enterprises, any of those businesses that are 51% black-owned automatically have a level 2 status. And any of those businesses that are fully black-owned, and I know that a lot of plumbing companies are sole proprietors or operate as individuals, those would be considered 100% black-owned. So what does all of this mean in terms of BEE and the level that's achieved? So on page 5, you'll see that the contribution level is there on the left. So I talked about being an automatic level 4 or a level 2 or a level 1. You can see in the middle there's some qualification points. Now, that doesn't apply to any of you that has a turnover less than 10 million rand. So we can ignore that. But on the right-hand side is the BEE recognition. So what you'll see here is that if you're a level 4 contributor, you have 100% BEE recognition. If you're a level 2, 125, and if you're level 1, 135. What does all of that mean? We're going to come to that in a moment. On page 7, what this looks at is how does the BEE status actually turn into points for businesses that might be using your plumbing services. So obviously this doesn't apply to individuals, and I realize that those of you on the call might be focusing mostly on individuals because that was the target audience for today. However, it's entirely possible that even though you might focus mostly on the private individuals, that from time to time you'll be dealing with companies. And so it's helpful to understand how this works. So companies are measured under procurement against their total measured procurement spend. So that's everything they spend, from operational expenditure to capital expenditure, pretty much every rand and cent that they spend that isn't typically related to employees. Now, what happens is, let's say that they're spending 220 rand from a level 1 company and 280 rand from a level 7 company. What you'll see in the table on the right-hand side is that the spend gets translated into rands, into BEE rands, by that recognition level that we looked at on the previous page. So the 220 rand from the level 1 company gets multiplied by 135%, and the 280 rand from the level 7 company gets multiplied by only 50%. And at the end of the day, one arrives at the total BEE spend and compares that against the overall procurement spend, and that's how points are awarded in BEE. So at a basic level, that is what a BEE level means in BEE. So moving on to the next page then, page 6. What we have here, and we don't need to worry too much, well, it's useful to look at the gray bit on the left compared to the green bit on the right, because this is going to show you how companies that are buying plumbing services will record that and get benefit from it. And it also is important really to understand that this is the reason why there is all of a sudden a big rush and a big focus on black-owned plumbing companies. Up until recently, before the codes changed in 2015, if you were a turnover less than 10 million rand company, you were exempt. And because of the way procurement worked, there wasn't really a very big incentive for companies to be buying from 51% black-owned companies. You'll see on the left there that there was 3 points for buying from these black-owned companies, but in the greater scheme of things, most companies could do very well and get the first line item 12 out of 20 points, and then with the balance of the line items, buying from small businesses and black-owned businesses, they'd get a sprinkling of points here and there, and they'd be fine on procurement. But what you'll see on the right-hand side, in the green section, is that the number of points that you can get from buying from suppliers of all shapes and sizes has gone down from 12 points to 5 points. And the number of points that you can get from buying from 51% black-owned companies has gone up from 3 points to 9 points. And of course, in addition, the amount of money that you need to be spending with black-owned companies has also gone up significantly. So I often get asked the question, well, I'm exempt from BEE, I automatically have a level 4, I've got 100% recognition, why on earth do I still have clients saying to me, yeah, but you're not black-owned and you don't have this and you don't have that? And this is the reason why. Under the old codes, it just wasn't so important. Under the new codes, nobody can even hope to begin to meet this 9 points, 40% target on buying from black-owned companies. So everybody is scrambling to find ways that they can do so. And as a result, the plumbing industry is being hit by that. If I then move on to the next section. So really what this section is saying is, specifically, this is for you guys, as plumbers that are servicing the end consumer, but not businesses that, are actually putting you under pressure for BEE. You don't need BEE. What do we have to say to that, and how does that relate to the plans and the initiatives which IOPSA is putting in place? Why is it relevant to you? Why should you care? And perhaps most importantly, what can you get out of the plans that IOPSA is putting into place? So I think the point is, first of all, even if BEE doesn't apply to your business and you don't have to do BEE, as I've just said, you can get benefit out of this. So the first question to ask here is, do you have a need for more staff? But of course, staff costs money, and there's a whole host of labor laws and so on and so forth, meaning that it is difficult, and often there's more of a lack of incentive or a disincentive to hire staff than an incentive. So you need more staff, but you don't want to take the risk and you don't want to pay for them. How can you get benefit out of IOPSA's programs? Well, that's what I'm going to be sharing with you today. Secondly, do you have the interest and the skills to mentor a black plumber that either is currently running or perhaps wants to run his own business in the future? So I'm sure most of you on the call are running your own business. You've been doing so for a number of years. Not only do you have the technical plumbing skills, but actually, critically, you know what it takes to run a plumbing business because you've been doing so. And are you interested in helping somebody else do that? And of course, we're not saying that that would come for free. So again, there could be a benefit in that for yourself. So we're going to have a look at a scenario around that. And then the third aspect is, and it links in with what I've been saying earlier around BEE and 51% black-owned plumbers and why it's important. But you may be aware that insurers are focusing on developing these black-owned plumbers, and they're wanting to include them in their panels that the end consumer can use to select services from. Now, I'm sure a lot of you get your business through whatever ways you advertise that business, word of mouth, etc. But one opportunity for you to grow your business could be to be on one of these panels. And in addition, if you have the right credentials within your business, you could potentially access different kinds of funding and support for your business to grow your business in the medium and the longer term. And this may particularly apply, I think it applies across the board, but it may particularly apply to plumbers who've been running their business for a long time and are looking at their business and knowing that it's not really saleable. I run my own consultancy, and who's going to want to buy my business? Why? Because I am the business. to a large extent, even though I do have quite a number of employees. So, one can be starting to face a scenario of, well, what does my retirement look like? Whether that's in only a few years' time or perhaps still even in 10, 20 years' time. What does my retirement look like if I don't have someone to take over the business? And is there any way that B-BBEE could be used to facilitate some of that process? And that's not going to be for everyone, but at least what we'll do is we'll have a look at the scenario and explain what the requirements are so that you can consider that and see whether it might be suitable for you. So I've moved on now to page 11. And what page 11 is doing is it's looking at the scenario of wanting, let's just call it free labor, because that's really what it is. Of course, nothing is really free at the end of the day. There's got to be a quid pro quo. But imagine that you could get labor for your business and not have to pay them anything. So how this works is IOPSA is running technical training programs for black plumbers as individuals. And the reason for that is because there's a need to improve on the technical skills that exist in the plumbing industry. But in order for plumbers to get their qualifications, they actually need to have real live on-the-job training because it's a practical, as you know, it's a practical job. So the only way that these plumbers will be able to get on-the-job training is if they get placed into plumbing businesses and if they get to do real live work and if they get mentorship and coaching and assistance on the job for the work that they're doing. And this can be completely funded through other organizations. For example, the insurance companies and the manufacturers. So they have their own incentives and needs for asking IOPSA to run these programs. And we don't need to go into that detail today, but all of the costs associated with these plumbers, including the subsidy that is paid to them, could be funded from IOPSA and from the program. And what this means is that you could get free staff. Perhaps there may be an aspect of saying, well, it can't be completely free and you have to pay a portion of the salary, but it might be quite a small portion as opposed to the whole amount. And all that you need to do in return is ensure that you are using your already trained staff and your managers to provide on-the-job training, mentoring, and coaching for these individuals so that they can get up to the level that they need in order to get their qualifications and be suitably qualified staff. There is no obligation for you to absorb them or retain them or pay for them beyond the period of their study, their learning with you. However, you of course can take them on if you have a space to take them on. And really in the longer term, given the understanding that I have from IOPSA with the challenges of the technical training in this space, in the longer term, an initiative like this will result in better trained and more productive staff for yourselves. So there's quite an interest from a number of companies looking to say, well, look how we can benefit from this, and all we have to do is provide this on-the-job training. So that's the first scenario. If I move on then to the second scenario. So this is the scenario where you may be running your own business and you actually feel like you've learned a hell of a lot over the last few years because running a business isn't easy. And there's certainly a lot of things that can go wrong and a lot of learnings that one can have over the years. So what this says is that you may take a plumber that has an existing business, or perhaps a plumber that has been identified as wanting and suitable to have his own business, but he doesn't have it just yet. And you would be required to provide mentoring and coaching to that person, to that individual running his business, in terms of the ability to run the business. And that would, it would include a wide range of activities, everything from pricing jobs to running administration and financial administration and so on and so forth. Now, IOPSA is looking to run a number of mentoring and coaching initiatives, and some organizations may choose to provide that at no cost, particularly ones that actually need to do BEE, so perhaps the larger plumbing companies. But those that don't need to do anything, there's nothing to say that they wouldn't be or couldn't be remunerated for their time and efforts. So if this is something that is of interest to yourselves, then it could be an additional revenue stream for you. Right, then to move on to the third scenario. This is page 13, and it does look like a little bit of a complicated page. So let me explain it bit by bit. This is really about saying, hang on, I actually don't need to do BEE right now, but I do want to grow my business. I do want to access opportunities. I do want to have somebody to hand my business over to the future so that I can retire and get some money out of my business. I'm interested in how to use BEE to do that. And as I said earlier, it might not be for everyone. So I'm going to focus on the first scenario because my understanding is that this is typically the second scenario. So let me get this right. Right, sorry. This is the first scenario where the plumber provides a service directly to the insurer or the construction company. So this is what I was talking about earlier when we talked about panels that plumbers might sit on. So even if it's possible that the end client might be paying the plumber, but you get the benefit of sitting on the panel with the construction company. And if the business that you run, instead of being the current white-owned business that it is, actually became a 51% black-owned plumbing business, in return, you would be able to access support and growth and, as I said, ultimately an exit from that business. So there is something in BEE called enterprise development, and there's something in BEE called supply development, and the nature of that can vary quite a lot. It's typically working capital to invest in and grow your business. Sometimes it's loan-based, sometimes it's money that you can use to train your workers. Sometimes it's money that you can just use to hire 5 more people so that you can take on bigger jobs, even though it might take 6 months or a year or longer before you can actually utilize all of those people. So there's lots of different ways that one can consider using enterprise and supply development funding. But really what this means is that you could access, at the best case, grants, other people's money, that could be invested in your business to grow it. But of course, the caveat or the requirement here is that your business then has to be a 51% black-owned business. And the second scenario is really quite a similar example, so I won't talk through in particular detail. What's more important then is to get to a brief look at what does black ownership mean and how could we do it. So I'm going to move on then. And I see that I haven't included any information in terms of how you could become a black-owned plumbing company. So I know we don't have too many attendees, but perhaps what I could do is understand from the attendees if there's an interest in how you could become a 51% black-owned plumbing company to access these benefits, or if that's something that's just never going to happen, and then we could spend a little bit of time talking about that. Can we do a poll, Bianca?
I think we cannot do a poll, but we have had one hand raised. So I think either way, there we go, raised again. Okay, if perfect. We can just touch on it, yes, just for the benefit of those offline as well.
No problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up another document for one of the other plumbing presentations, just so that we can actually look at that in a bit more detail. And I can update the document and send that to you, Bianca, to put in, the Dropbox for anyone else wanting to do this. So let me pull this one up. So this section then, page 17, is what are your options if you wanted to become a 51% or if you wanted to have black ownership. So obviously black ownership can be at different levels. The only thing that's really going to assist small companies like yourselves with a less than 10 million rand turnover is a 51% level. For other companies, perhaps that have a revenue between 10 and 50 million rand, then even as little as 10% black ownership would be impactful for them. But there wouldn't be any benefit to yourselves right now of becoming a 10% black-owned entity, unless, of course, it was part of a longer-term strategy to slowly hand your business over or sell your business to black individuals. So the next page then is looking at what are the different options. So your options here, so I've talked about the fact that we're talking about the column on the very left here. You service the end consumer. So we've said that only 51% makes sense. The best BE shareholders here is one or more trusted individual partners. Now, in my experience over the last 10 years of BEE, I've seen this happen very rarely. Having a business partner at the best of times can be challenging because obviously partners have got different views and sometimes different objectives and different ways of wanting to take things forward. So having an individual partner is something which is typically reserved, or I would recommend that it would be reserved for scenarios where you have worked closely with an individual for a number of years, and you believe that they are a suitable person to take over your business. The second option then is employees. So it is possible to have employees owning 51% of your business. The challenge, of course, is that if you only have one other employee other than yourself or two other employees other than yourself, that can be a little bit challenging. But a number of organizations with less than 10 million rand, I mean, I'm sure that there's plenty of space for having quite a number of employees. And some of those employees, it may be possible to include them even if they are only part-time employees to your organization. So employees is a big option, and it's generally quite attractive to companies because there's a sense of, well, not any one person is benefiting, so it's okay from the sense of being an owner and the view of perhaps giving away your business. The second view is also that employees often work very hard in the business and contribute to the success of that business. And by allowing them to share in the success of that business, it can be motivating to them and reward them for their hard work. The third type of option then is a broad-based trust. And that is something that is less defined than employees. It's typically a trust or a not-for-profit company that has been set up to achieve a particular purpose or a particular vision. So let me, give you an example of that. A charity could be a broad-based trust. Any charity out there that is, whether it's a soup kitchen or focusing on bursaries for students or whatever it might be, it might have been set up so that it can take ownership. And in that case, what happens is that the dividends and the capital gain that benefit the shareholders, that what happens is that money ends up benefiting the not-for-profit, and they are able to continue their soup kitchen activities or their providing bursaries for students type activities. So there are some risks on broad-based ownership schemes and employee share ownership schemes. So those are the two of the three examples outside of the sort of typically a single individual. It could also be more than one individual having that shareholding in your business. So before we talk a bit more about those different types of BEE shareholders, maybe just to say that the DTI doesn't necessarily love employee share schemes and broad-based ownership schemes. The DTI has tried to reduce their participation by just changing the law overnight, and there was a big outcry because they weren't authorized to change the law, and so they had to backtrack on what they said. I have been hearing for 2 years now that the rules for these employee share ownership schemes and broad-based ownership schemes are going to change. So far, I've seen nothing, and I know people who've sat on these panels, and even 6 months ago, I was told by someone who sits on this panel that it's imminent, that it's coming out, and it hasn't. And, you know, my view on this is I don't think it's actually that the government isn't competent to release the information or get it done. I think that it's a political issue. I think that your trade unions jump up and down when anyone tries to make any changes to employee share schemes. And your bigger broad-based trusts, some of them have got billions and billions of rands under management and often have a lot of political clout. If there were to be changes to those types of entities, there would probably be a big outcry from those organizations, much as there was when the DTI tried to change the law before. So, and I also think that there would be court cases because a lot of organizations have gone to court and well, they've spent they've invested in those companies from a BE ownership perspective. So the long and the short of that whole long saga is that my view is that the DTI is just trying to make some noise about the fact that they don't like these schemes, but I actually don't think the law is going to change. So where possible and where suitable, having a black individual have ownership in your business is certainly preferable. But having them have 51% of your business, it means that you're giving over basic control to them, and that's probably quite risky for organizations such as yourselves. But it may be more palatable and more interesting to consider probably an employee share ownership scheme as the sort of primary option, but as a secondary option, you know, an organization that is giving money for bursaries. In fact, you could even focus it specifically on the plumbing industry, that kind of thing. So there are options that are available to you. If you wanted to go ahead and implement a BE transaction, obviously we're not going to cover all of those details today, but there's a whole host of things that need to be considered when doing an ownership transaction. And that's everything from the BE shareholder that you need to have, which we've touched on, all the way through to, well, do I have to give my business away? Do I sell my business? There are legal documents that need to be put in place. If one is going to go ahead with something like that, one does need to have a good advisor who's done this many times before to advise you on the specific intricacies and rules that apply to each of those different types of BE shareholders. And that really, I know that we're only 40 minutes in, but the other two presentations focused on plumbers is quite a bit more detailed because it's really relating to companies that have to do BEE, whereas the audience for today is, well, you don't have to do BEE. So the webinar itself is a bit shorter than the others. So I'm finished from my side in terms of the slides that I have to show you. But Bianca, perhaps we can, if you're still there, we can move over to questions. I'm not seeing any questions. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, it looks like we don't have any questions. So on that note, I'm going to close off the session and thank everyone very much for their time. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye-bye.